According to Oliver Wyman, one of the leading healthcare consulting firms in this country, who announced on Monday that a set of policies, which we call Alexander, Murray, Collins, Nelson, which President Trump supports, which Congressman Walden, the chairman of the House committee in this area, supports, which Senator McConnell supports, which I support. We have broad support for this. This policy that we've been working on for months, according to Oliver Wyman, over the next 3 years, assuming states take full advantage of all the options we're giving them, could lower rates by 40%. Now, what does that mean? That means if you're paying $20,000 for your health insurance, you're that $60,000 a year plumber, that's 40% of $20,000. That's, by my math, $8,000. That cuts your insurance to $12,000. You get down towards something you might be able to afford. Can you imagine anything more frightening than approaching next year, knowing that you might not be able to afford health insurance for your family, and you're thinking, well, look, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to. The government's not got me on any kind of subsidy to buy health insurance. I'm out here working. I'm paying my taxes. Maybe I got a little tax cut that the Republicans put through last year, but the thing that's really a problem for me is my health insurance. If I'm making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year, I cannot afford $15,000, $20,000, or $25,000 a year. If I'm a farmer in Iowa or a miner in Alaska or a songwriter in Nashville, you can't afford that, and you shouldn't have to, and you won't have to if Congress will act next week to accept the set of policies that I'm about to describe briefly. There are three things that we propose to do. The most important is 3 years of reinsurance or invisible risk pool. This is an idea that House Republicans have strongly supported, that Senator Collins and Senator Nelson have strongly supported here, but it would allow more states to do what the state of Alaska has done. The presiding officer is from Alaska. Alaska took the very sickest people in Alaska and put them in one pool and called that the reinsurance pool and paid for their health insurance. And when they did that, it so reduced the costs for everybody else that it lowered the rates for everybody else by 20%. What we're talking about is lowering the rates for everybody else by 40% if states take full advantage of what we're proposing next week. So reinsurance is the first thing. 3 years of reinsurance at $10 billion a year. The second thing is 3 years of cost-sharing subsidies. Now, you have to stop and think about it a minute, but the cost-sharing subsidies pay for the reinsurance, because cost-sharing subsidies are payments that are made to insurance companies to pay for the copays and the deductibles for low-income people. And that allows the companies to reduce the premiums. And when you reduce the premiums, you reduce the Obamacare subsidies. So according to conversations we've had with the Congressional Budget Office, if we do 3 years of cost-sharing subsidies and 3 years of reinsurance at $10 billion, the cost-sharing subsidies more than pay for the reinsurance, if you base it on reality, which is if Congress passes a law that costs $30 billion over 3 years for reinsurance and 3 years of cost-sharing subsidies, the cost-sharing subsidies pay for the reinsurance and leave $2 billion over to reduce the federal debt. And then the third part is a set of proposals that would give states more flexibility. This streamlines the Section 1332 waiver in the Affordable Care Act. It makes some changes that permit the agency we call CMS to approve waivers from states like the state of Alaska or Nebraska or Tennessee, who may say, we would like to spend our Obamacare subsidy money in a different way. And we would like to add some of this reinsurance money to it. And by doing that, that's how you achieve the 40% saving for the Nebraska self-employed farmer or the Nashville songwriter in their insurance policies. So that set of proposals, plus within there, is a provision for what we call a catastrophic policy, which is a policy that has somewhat lower, higher deductibles, but lower premiums that people may choose to buy. Now, all of that policy has broad bipartisan support. I mean, the reinsurance provision, I think in the Republican discussions we've had in the Senate, almost everybody seems to agree that the only way we can have an individual market, which is the market for people who buy insurance on their own, people who don't get it from Medicare, people who don't get it from Medicaid, people who don't get it on the job. Let's say you're between jobs or you're self-employed, you're the songwriter, you're the plumber. Those people, those are the people that we're focused on here. There are about 11 million in the United States, but there could be a lot more because all of us know what it's like to think about, well, I might lose my job or I might change jobs. And what do I do for insurance in that interim? I have the so-called COBRA available, but it's very expensive. And if I suddenly go out there and find I'm losing my job and I'm changing jobs and I'm worrying about insurance, that's the person that we're talking about. Now, where did these ideas come from? Did we just write them on the back of an envelope and give them to Congress? No. We went through a very serious process here in the Senate. Senator Murray, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Health Committee, I'm the chairman, held 4 hearings last fall after Republicans failed to repeal and replace the Obamacare law. And we invited all senators to participate, and we had more than half the Senate come to our hearings and to our meetings with the witnesses, and out of that came the proposals to streamline the 1332 waiver, that's flexibility for states, and the need to pay for the cost-sharing subsidies temporarily because people began to understand that they don't cost money, they save taxpayer money because they reduce the need for federal taxpayer subsidies. So that's where that came from. The single most important idea that was not a part of the original Alexander Murray proposal was reinsurance, or in the House they call it invisible risk pool. Senator Collins and Nelson have championed it here. Representative Costello, Representative Meadows, other people championed it over there. It was a part of the Republican repeal and replace legislation in the House of Representatives. So the idea of 3 years of reinsurance really has come from both bodies, from both sides of the aisle. And it is the most essential part of any long-term policy to create an individual market where people can buy insurance if they don't get it on the job or get it from the government. And this would give states $500,000 in the current year, 2018, to plan for their reinsurance pools. It would then create $10 billion over 3 years that states could use to help pay for their reinsurance pools. And they would use their 1332 streamlined waiver in the second and third year, so they could have a combination of state money, reinsurance federal money, and Obamacare subsidy money, and hopefully in that process create their own way of helping to pay for the needs of the very sickest people in the state, and by taking them out of the insurance pool, lower the rates for everybody else over that 4-year period, according to the Oliver Wyman consulting firm, by as much as 40%. Now, the Congressional Budget Office has also reviewed the set of proposals I've just described. My staff has been working closely with them because we want to know what it costs if we're going to put it in the omnibus bill. And the preliminary feedback from the Congressional Budget Office is more conservative than the Oliver Wyman estimate. The Congressional Budget Office says that it would reduce premiums by an average of 10% in 2019 and 20% in 20 and 21 if states take full advantage of the 1332 waiver that they have. As you can imagine, Madam President, state governors, state insurance commissioners are delighted with this package. First, they would like to see us do something in a bipartisan way to stabilize the health insurance market so people aren't scared to death that they may not be able to buy a policy next year. But second, they think it's sound policy. It's sound policy. Much of this started when the president called me last August and said, between now and the time we make a final decision on what to do about the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, the president said, I want to make sure that people aren't hurt. So he asked me if I would work with Senator Murray and see if we could come up with a bipartisan set of proposals that would stabilize the individual market. He called me several times about that, and we've worked together since then. That's when we came together with the original Alexander Murray proposal. Then we had a big disagreement here within the Senate, and we had our tax bill, and we repealed the individual mandate in the Affordable Care Act. Republicans thought that was a good idea because it made people buy insurance that they didn't want, and it was a tax on low-income people, so we got rid of it. Democrats didn't like that at all, and the fact is true that taking the individual mandate out, even though states can add it back if they want to, does increase the cost of insurance in the individual market. But despite that, this set of policies that I've described, the state flexibility, the 3 years of cost-sharing subsidies, and the 3 years of reinsurance invisible risk pools, those three policies, according to Oliver Wyman Consulting, one of the leading health consulting firms in America, could lower rates 40% lower than they otherwise would be. And according to the Congressional Budget Office, a nonpartisan agency that looks at things for us, it will lower them 10% in 2019 and as much as 20% in the next 2 years after that. Even if it's only 20 and not 40, 20% of $20,000 is $4,000 for Marty, the self-employed farmer in Nashville, who stopped me at the Chick-fil-A and said her insurance had gone from $300 to $1,300, $1,400 a month. So, Mr. President, Madam President, I ask consent to include in the record the report of the Oliver Wyman Consulting Company that says that the combination of policies I just described, reinsurance, cost-sharing subsidies, and the Section 1332 waiver, the state flexibility, those three policies will reduce rates by up to 40%. And finally, Mr. President, Madam President, I would ask the question, what if we don't do this? I'm generally a very optimistic person. I'm results-oriented. You don't get results if you don't work across party lines and if you don't think you're going to succeed. So I always think we'll succeed. This has been more difficult to do than it should have been. And if I would like to suggest to my colleagues and to the American people that we should focus on October 1 of this year, because that's the date when insurance rates for next year, 2019, will be announced all across the country. Insurance companies are working with insurance commissioners in every state to try to figure out what's going to be happening, what the rates will be, and they'll be announcing them October 1, about a month before the next election. And there are a lot of people going to be looking at that because in my state of Tennessee, rates were up 58% this year. That's for the plumber making $60,000 a year, the songwriter, Marty the farmer, the people I've been describing, 58% increase. So they're going to be looking on October 1st to see whether they can even afford any insurance in 2019. If we do what we're proposing here, the Alexander Murray Collins Nelson set of policies, which has broad bipartisan support in the House and in the Senate and the support of the President, if we do that next week, Marty, the self-employed farmer in Tennessee, will be able to see on October 1 that her rates will go down. And that if Oliver Wyman is correct, instead of her rates going up 58% like they did this year, they'll go down 40% over the next 2 or 3 years. That means she can afford insurance. If we don't do it, rates will go up. The individual market will probably collapse. It was near collapse a year ago. By collapse, I mean there'll be counties where people can't buy insurance at all. There'll be 11 million people who are between jobs, who are self-employed, who are working, who literally cannot afford insurance, and they're not going to be very happy campers. And they're going to blame every one of us, and they should. They're going to blame the president. They're going to blame Republicans. They're going to blame Democrats. They're going to blame insurance companies, because we have an opportunity next week to solve that problem in a bipartisan way, developed through a bipartisan process, incorporating ideas that virtually everyone who looks at it says make very good policy sense. We have a couple of things to work through on ancillary issues, but those shouldn't cloud the fact that we can reduce rates for the working American who can't afford insurance by up to 40%. And we can announce that, the insurance companies will announce that on October 1, or we can do nothing, and we can let the markets falter. Some counties be places where you can't buy insurance at all. Some counties be places where you can't afford insurance at all, and have people look at us and say, my goodness, why'd we send them up there to do nothing about that? So I'm optimistic, Madam President. I think we can do it. I appreciate the hard work on both sides of the aisle. It's been a very difficult negotiation in many respects. I appreciate the President's consistency over the last several months in supporting this, the Vice President's work. Senator McConnell has been very supportive of this, which makes it very helpful in terms of getting it into the bipartisan agreement next week. And I look forward to being able to say to my songwriters and self-employed businessmen and women and plumbers and Marty the farmer that if they're making $60,000 or $70,000 in Tennessee, we've put in place something that will lower their rates by 40% over the next 3 years. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor. Notice the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call.